What is up, my subscribers, my friends, fellow optimizers, game enthusiasts? Don't know. Regardless, welcome to the next episode of Brooke Talks About Something That's Going to Take 3 years to develop. The Sorcerer. Now, I've gone over every other class so far, and there's only 3 to 4 left. As I still have the video you're watching now, which is the Sorcerer, I have the Warlock, the Wizard, and the Artificer. Now, I like to preface this with a disclaimer. In 5th edition, I have yet to personally play a full-blooded Sorcerer. The only knowledge that I have on their mechanics and how they're meant to function is from reading and taking anecdotal pieces of evidence from people who have played sorcerers. Granted, most of them are using sorcerers as sort of a supplementary class as opposed to being a full sorcerer 100% of the time. But I digress. The main complaints I've heard and what I've read from Sorcerer is the lack of number of spells they get. They are a non-preparation based spellcaster, and so any spells that they get from their class list are basically the only spells that they get. Until Tasha's came out and gave them the whole, at every level up you can change one spell. But I don't think that's enough. The Sorcerer, though, is pretty powerful due to the fact that it is a full caster, and it has certain spells shared between different classes, primarily the Wizard, the Warlock, and the Cleric in some cases. But the primary one was that they have a very limited number of spells to pick from. And their list is pretty alright. It's not the best compared to Druid and Wizard, but it's not bad. So, like I've stated in previous spellcaster videos, they're going to go based off of the standard progression chart. They're going to gain 1 power per level, except at first level, where they gain 2 at-will powers, and they gain an additional power at subsequent levels. And I'm still thinking about keeping that for the updated system that's not reliant on 5th edition. Maybe I might boost it up even more. But regardless, that's kind of the same progression that every class is going to follow. Now, the Sorcerer, another complaint that I've heard is the strange progression of their main class features being their sorcery points and their metamagics. And the fact that metamagic comes 1 level later, so you essentially get your resource as a sorcerer earlier than you get your main class feature of the metamagic. So that's going to be changed to where you get your metamagic and your sorcery points at the same level, and your metamagics are going to function a little bit differently in terms of specifics. I think that you should, in some capacity, be able to use as many metamagics on a single effect as you want. Because, let's just be frank here, you only get your metamagics back on a long rest, I believe. Unless you have the Vial of Blood item from either Tasha's or whatever that book was, where as a sorcerer you give yourself a vial of your own blood and you get 5 additional sorcery points. But not counting that, you really only get your sorcery points back on a rest. And that's just not enough. And your capstone doesn't help where you get more sorcery points whenever you roll initiative. It's just not enough. And the fact that the spell conversion doesn't really make sense is a bit strange to me. The fact that only empowered spell can be used with other metamagics is a bit weird, because it doesn't even really boost your damage all that much. And so the fact that it costs 1 point and then an additional point for every die you want to roll, and then you have other effects that don't work with it. Like if you want a fireball and you roll low on your fireball, but you also want it to be longer range, this way you can stay out of danger, but you also don't want it to get counterspelled, you can't have Empower, Subtle, and Distant. You can only have one of those two, so you're either going to get counterspelled, or you have to risk your safety to get closer into range. Which is, granted, a really good design, but in terms of feel, it doesn't really feel all that good. So a lot of the meta magics, in my opinion, are going to be changed. Some are going to be added. Some are going to be split between different forms or added to different things. The primary one that I think is going to be changed the most is Quicken Spell. Now, the problem with Quicken Spell, in my opinion, is that bonus action spellcasting rules in 5th edition really hinder its effectiveness, as you, as a sorcerer, you have unstable magic. At least in lore, your magic is unstable due to the nature of it being innately inside of your body, and you didn't really have to study for it, you didn't really have to practice to gain it, or go through some deal with some entity that has extraordinary magic to gain it. You just have it. And it's unstable in the fact that it is very hard to control, and that's why your magic is so wild with the meta magic, that it does random things that you don't want it to do. And so the bonus action spellcasting rule kind of changes this, where it limits you from doing the thing that you want to do, which is, at least in 5th edition, spam fireballs. Let's just be honest, that's what you really want to do with it. But in my system, since spellcasters have powers, and every power is the equivalent of a full action, like just a standard action, I don't think having an ability that allows them to use a power as a bonus action or a minor action is really going to affect it all that much in terms of balance, especially if you're expending a resource and another action to do it. Because you must remember, in other systems, primarily 4th edition, with their action point, they only get another action. And yes, you can technically boil that down into another bonus action or another move action, what have you. But the fact of the matter is that in my system, in my ideal system, this point will only give you a standard action, and there's no way you can kind of progress it downwards. That's my hope, at least. I might change that later, but as of right now, I don't think giving them an additional spell or an additional effect as a bonus action is really all that bad, considering how you're not only spending a portion of your action economy, but you're also spending a resource and using an ability that has a separate cooldown. So yeah, you could use you could use Quicken Spell to make your Fireball go from a standard action to a minor action, but then since Fireball is an encounter spell, you can't use it again anyway. So having an additional spell that you can use, specifically a cantrip, or in this case an at-will power, or maybe an additional encounter power, or hell, maybe even a daily power, or maybe a utility, I don't think that's going to be that broken, especially when you take into account that the additional action will most likely be used for things like a cantrip, maybe like Eldritch Blast or something. But regardless, more spells, technically speaking, more spells, your meta magic and your sorcery points are going to be at the same level. As for their capstone, that will also be changed. To what? I have no clue. I have to design it first. And in terms of what its role would be, I would say it'd be really close to either a striker or a leader, because it really doesn't fit. It doesn't really fit controller all that well, though it could be. But in my opinion, there's not a lot of work that needs to be done with the sorcerer. Just minor fixes, tweaks, and revisions But other than that, it's a relatively good class, all things considered. But when we get to the video where I explain the basic rules of my system and how all of my reworks are coming together and how they're all going to be affected by this, it will all make sense once we get to that point. But as of right now, I think the Sorcerer in my system will work just fine, having multiple things it can do on a turn, because honestly, my primary gripe with 4th edition was that players and monsters don't really have enough to do with their minor action. And really, since you can only move actions down as opposed to moving them up, which makes sense, it's a balancing decision. But it's very odd that a creature who is not moving a lot can't use their move action for something else if their stat block doesn't have a power for it, or if a player is playing a class that doesn't need to use their move action all that much, and there's not a class like the Warlord that allows them to move, or the Bard that allows them to move, or something along those lines that allows them to use their movement in a unique way, your minor action isn't really getting used all that much, and your movement isn't really getting used all that much. So it's a bit strange to me, and that was one of my main gripes. So I think giving sorcerers the uniqueness of spellcasters, that they can technically cast more spells than other classes in a turn, but at the cost of their resource, in addition to expending that spell for the encounter, I think is perfectly fine. It would make it really strong, so a lot of their abilities would have to be lowered to be in line with other casters, but I don't think that is too much to handle, especially since it's going to be one of many other classes that you could pick from. And since multi-classing is getting changed, that'll be another video for another time, that's also going to be a little bit different. So, classes may be able to get meta magic at some point. Who knows? I haven't decided on the exact function of multi-classing and how that's going to work yet, but we'll see. But yeah, that's what I plan on doing with Sorcerer. Not much to change, really. Just a few things that need to be changed and reworking them into my system from the ground up.